Chapter 26. Knights and Squires. The chief mate of the Pequod was Starbuck, a native of Nantucket and a Quaker by descent. He was a long, earnest man, and though born on an icy coast, seemed well adapted to endure hot latitudes, his flesh being hard as twice-baked biscuit. Transported to the Indies, his live blood would not spoil like bottled ale. He must have been born in some time of general drought and famine, or upon one of those fast days for which his state is famous. Only some 30 arid summers had he seen. These summers had dried up all his physical superfluousness. But this, his thinness, so to speak, seemed no more the token of wasting anxieties and care than it seemed the indication of any bodily blight. It was merely the condensation of the man. He was by no means ill-looking, quite the contrary. His pure, tight skin was an excellent fit, and closely wrapped up in it and embalmed with inner health and strength like a revivified Egyptian. This Starbuck seemed prepared to endure for long ages to come, and to endure always, as now, be it for polar snow or torrid sun, like a patent chronometer. His interior vitality was warranted to do well in all climates. Looking into his eyes, you seem to see that they're the yet lingering images of those thousand-fold perils he had calmly confronted through life. A staid, steadfast man, whose life for the most part was telling pantomime of action, and not a tame chapter of sounds. Yet for all his hearty sobriety and fortitude, there were certain qualities in him which at times affected, and in some cases seemed well nigh to overbalance all the rest. Uncommonly conscientious for a seaman, and endued with a deep natural reverence. The wild, watery loneliness of his life did therefore strongly incline him to superstition, but to that sort of superstition which, in some organizations, seemed rather to spring somehow from intelligence than from ignorance. Outward portents and inward presentiments were his, and if at times these things bent the welded iron of his soul, much more did his faraway domestic memories of his young Cape wife and child tend to bend him still more from the original ruggedness of his nature, and open him still further to those latent influences in which some honest-hearted men restrain the gush of daredevil daring, so often evinced by others in the mere perilous vicissitudes of the fishery. "I will have no man in my boat," said Starbuck, "who is not afraid of a whale." By this he seemed to mean not only that the most reliable and useful courage was that which arises from the fair estimation of the encountered peril, but that an utterly fearless man is a far more dangerous comrade than a coward. "Aye, aye," said Stubb with the second mate. "Starbuck there is as careful a man as you'll find anywhere in this fishery. But we shall ere long see what the word careful precisely means when used by a man like Stubb, or almost any other whale hunter." Starbuck was no crusader after perils. In him, courage was not a sentiment, but a thing simply useful to him, and always at hand upon the mortally practical occasions. Besides, he thought perhaps that in this business of whaling, courage was one of the great staple outfits of the ship, like her beef and her bread, not to be foolishly wasted. Wherefore he had no fancy for lowering for whales after sundown, nor persisting in fighting a fish that too much persisted in fighting him. "For," thought Starbuck, "I am here in this critical ocean to kill whales for my living, and not to be killed by them for theirs," and that hundreds of men had been so killed Starbuck well knew. What doom was his own father's? Where in the bottomless deeps could he find the torn limbs of his brother? With memories like these in him, and moreover given to certain superstitiousness, as has been said, the courage of this Starbuck, which could, nevertheless, still flourish, must indeed have been extreme. But it was not in the reasonable nature that a man go or so organized, and with such terrible experiences and remembrances as he had, it was not in the nature that these things should fail in latently engendering an element in him, which, under suitable circumstances, would break out from its confinement and burn all his courage up. As brave as he might be, it was a sort of bravery chiefly visible in some intrepid men, which, while generally abiding firm in the conflict with seas or winds or whales or any of the ordinary irrational horrors of the world, yet cannot withstand those more terrific, because more spiritual terrors, which sometimes menace you from the concentrating brow of an enraged and mighty man. But were the coming narrative to reveal in any instance the complete abasement of poor Starbuck's fortitude, scarce I might have heart to write it, for it is a thing most sorrowful, nay shocking, to expose the fall of valor in the soul. Men may seem detestable as a joint stock companies and nations, knaves, fools, and murderers there may be. Men may have mean and meager faces, but man, in the ideal, is so noble and so sparkling, such a grand and glowing creature, that over any ignominious blemish in him all his fellows should run to throw their costliest robes. That immaculate manliness we feel within ourselves, so far within us that it remains intact, though all the outer character seem gone, bleeds with keenest anguish upon the undraped spectacle of a valor-ruined man. Nor can piety itself at such a shameful sight completely stifle her upbraidings against the permitting stars. But this august dignity I treat of is not the dignity of kings in robes, but the abounding dignity which has no robed investiture. Thou shalt see it shining in the arm that wields a pick or drives a spike, that democratic dignity which on all hands radiates without end from God himself, the great God absolute, the center and circumference of all democracy. His omnipresence our divine equality. If then to the meanest mariners and renegades and castaways I shall hereafter ascribe high qualities, though dark, weave round them tragic graces, if even the most mournful, perchance the most debased among them all, shall at times lift himself to exalted mounts, if I shall touch that workman's arm with some ethereal light, if I shall spread a rainbow over his disastrous set of sun, then against all mortal critics bear me out in it. For thou, just spirit of equality, which has spread one royal mantle of humanity over all my kind, bear me out in it, thou great democratic God, who dost not refuse the swart convict Bunyan, the pale poetic pearl. Thou didst clothe in doubly hammer leaves of finest gold the stump and paupered arm of old Cervantes. Thou who didst pick up Andrew Jackson from the pebbles, who didst hurl him on upon a war horse, who didst thunder him higher than a throne. Thou who in all thy mighty earthly marchings ever cullest thy selectest champions from the kingly commons, bear me out in it, O God. This is the end of chapter 26. So, Starbuck is described as tall and lean, thin. There's a whole bunch of different ways that people can look when they're thin. Where, you can look at somebody who's thin and you can see that they're unhealthy because their cheeks get hollow and their skin takes on this sort of papery look. Some people are thin because they lose a lot of weight quickly. When I was in my coma, I lost 30-40 pounds, and I just shed the weight, and I looked like death warmed over, and I could reach down to my thigh and grab like a handful of flesh and pull it up and just pull the skin away from the bones, and that's not a good look. If you see the skin hanging off of the body, that's usually a sign that something not good has happened. Starbuck, though, is described as having the skin stretched tight over him. So he probably has the strong, wiry arms where you can see all the little individual muscles up and down. Maybe see the veins out. But the skin is stretched tight. Now, if someone lost weight due to illness or starvation, then the skin would tend to hang and not be over the muscles, because the body burns off muscle far faster than it burns off other things. Well, it burns sugar first and then muscle and then starts burning fat, which there are evolutionary reasons for that. There's actually chemical reasons for that, because the proteins are more shaped like sugars, and sugars are easy to break down, while there's an entirely different metabolic pathway for breaking down fatty acids. So the fatty acids, it has to break down into ketones, and the ketones it has to reassemble into sugars, and the sugars it then breaks down and uses. So there's this whole convoluted pathway to get fatty acids burned, while with sugars it's just the Krebs cycle, and it's like glucose goes to goes to two lactic acids. I can't remember. Krebs cycle is out there. You'll look it up. You'll see it. You'll go, I will never have to remember this. But biologists know it, and it's this complicated thing. And burning fats is even more complicated just to get to the Krebs cycle. So Starbuck is described as being thin. He's also described, he says that he doesn't want anyone who's not afraid of a whale with him. And there are some very good reasons for that. One reason is that if you have no fear, then you're going to take unnecessary risks. Recently on the trip out to the Grand Canyon, your dad went over to the edge of the Grand Canyon and then down some, and your mom just lost her stuff. And because she didn't think that your dad was taking the risk seriously. So if you don't take the risk seriously, then you may do dangerous things. And when you do dangerous things, bad things can happen. So, you have to wisely assess the risk. And it says that Starbuck assesses these risks. He knows that his father died whaling, his brother died whaling, but he's still out whaling. But, he knows what the risks are. He knows what the rewards are. So he figures that, he can make a good life and stock up a little bit of money and come back, live with the wife and kid and semi-retirement. Or perhaps do as Peleg and Bildad did and buy a ship of his own and send people out on it and just live happily on shore. So at 30, he's probably getting close to that point. Figure he's been out for 15 years, maybe started out as a cabin boy. So half of his life he's been out at sea. And he'll probably make it 40, 50. So that's another 15 years. So he's done half of his working life. And so, he's like, I don't want to take any stupid risks. I don't want people who will take stupid risks. And another reason why you want to avoid people who aren't afraid is because if they suddenly become afraid, they don't have any plans to deal with it. So I worry. I'm a terrible worrier. I worry about all sorts of things that never happen. But at the same time, I make plans. So it's like, okay, I'm driving down the road and I have a plan of if a tire blows, that I can ditch over into the left-hand lane, or I can ditch over into the left shoulder. I could ditch over into the right shoulder. If that truck has a piece of tarp that flies off of it, then I know that I can back up, slow down, and dodge either left or right, depending on what happens. And if it doesn't, then I know that I can steer over the rumble strip, and once I pass the rumble strip, I can stop. So, you hit the rumble strip left tire, hit the rumble strip right tire, then you are off the road, and you can stop, and then get out and take the tarp off. Not that I've ever had to do that, but these are some of the things that I think about when I'm driving. Or what happens if the brakes go out in the car? Well, if the brakes go out in the car, then I can lower the gear and I stop the engine, or I can lower it down into first gear, and then the engine will slowly brake. I can aim towards the side of the road and get the car off the road. Also, you can use the handbrake, because the handbrake and the normal brake are independent of each other. The handbrake is usually wired, so that there's a wire that runs from the handbrake to the brakes, and so you pull on that, and it's just a solid wire pull, which makes it fairly idiot-proof, so that once the handbrake is up, the brakes are fully applied, and the car stops. If that doesn't work, then you can throw it into park, which risks ruining the transmission, but it's better than going off of a cliff. Or you can intentionally run into things, which, once again, is not good, no bueno. But, if you're scraping along the guardrail, you can come to a stop even with no brakes, because, the car The passenger's not going to be happy about it, but it'll get the car stopped and you won't run into things. So, but if someone doesn't think about these things, and then all of a sudden, like a leaf or not even a leaf, let's say a garbage or Walmart bag. So you go shopping those poly bags that that everyone goes and then you reuse for whatever. You get it at the grocery store. One of those bags flies up. Some people see it and freak, and I've seen this happen. I've seen people just go, ah! Well, it's like, look, it's a bag. It's obviously empty or almost empty because it's flying. And because it's flying, that means it's going to hit the airstream of the car and go up over. And the biggest worry is it's going to hit the antenna or something. In which case, you find a good spot to pull over, you pull it off, you curse the person who litters, and you throw it away. But, so Starbuck did not want anyone. And then Ishmael goes on to talk about how he sometimes praises people who are lowly and ascribes to them great attributes. Now, there was a trope, a sort of convention, something that was it was done because it was the way to do it, where noble people were great and the poor random guys aren't great. Now, he talked about Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill was an incredibly popular president, but did a whole bunch of really bad things. So, on the list of things to do when I'm president, getting Andrew Jackson's ass off the 20 is right up there. I don't care if it's Harriet Tubman. I don't care if we put Grover Cleveland, since they already have prints for him on the 100,000. Okay, I guess not Grover Cleveland because there's still thousands out there. Salmon Chase, who's on the $100,000 bill, or maybe he's on the $500,000. There's some bill out there with like stupid high denominations that were only used for bank transfers. But then, so put his face on just to get Andrew Jackson's off. But anyway, Andrew Jackson was kind of like this nobody. And then he became a general. And then he ran for president and became president. And one of the terrible things he did was something called the Trail of Tears, where he took all of the Cherokees who were well integrated into society. I mean, they dressed like the white settlers, they spoke like the white settlers, they acted just normal, they were well integrated with our society. And he took all of them and he shipped them off to Oklahoma. Now, they came from the Carolinas. Lush, green, mountainous territory. Beautiful, beautiful place. I mean, just like hills and trees and lots of rain. It's just wonderful. And he shipped them off to Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma is dry. And there are no trees. Well, there are a few trees in Oklahoma, but there are many trees in Oklahoma. You can't really grow the same crops in Oklahoma that you grow in North Carolina. And in addition to all of that, forcibly relocating them, just rounding them up and moving them, he just rounded them up and moved them. He walked them there. So it was called the Trail of Tears, several hundred miles of walking. Men, women, children, old people, just everybody. Walk with what you can carry. Lots of people died on the way, sickness, starvation, and I mean, it was one of the most abominable things done by the U.S. government, and it was done by the Democrat Andrew Jackson. So, Andrew Jackson, though, he was a good general. He was an effective general. He had some other things about him that made him popular. Another thing was Cervantes. Clothe the double hammer. Thou didst clothe with doubly hammered leaves of finest gold the stump and paupered arm of old Cervantes. Okay, so Miguel de Cervantes was a writer in the 1500s, I think, early 1500s. And he wrote Don Quixote de la Mancha, which is a great story, and maybe I'll read it to you later. But it's a story of a man who decides the world is bad, we need more knights. I'm going to be a knight. And so here you have somebody who's just like totally unequipped to be a knight. But it was written by Cervantes. And Cervantes wasn't really a great guy. Well, he was an okay guy, but he was poor and kind of he wasn't what you would expect for the writer. And he wrote Don Quixote, which is arguably the greatest piece of literature in Spanish. Um, it's one of those books that's been made into movies and all sorts of other things. So I mean, Don Quixote like is one of the great epics of Western literature. So anyway, Cervantes, who was kind of a nobody, wrote this book. And so Ishmael's point is that a lot of people who aren't noble have a lot of great qualities, and or have a lot of impressive qualities. A lot of humble people have some great qualities or have some noble qualities about them, which goes against the convention that only great people could be great, and everyone else was just kind of a schlub. But anyway, that was a serious trope around the time where it's like, okay, you have to be something noble, and then in modern society we've kind of gotten away from that, where it's, I guess, the democratization of it, where anybody can be great. Or anybody can be great, or anyone can have great noble attributes, while the humble people aren't. Anyway, that's the end of chapter 26.